Hello, everybody. My name is Chester Jackson. Welcome back from lunch. It was joyous, was it not? I thoroughly enjoyed mine. I am the helpline coordinator here at the Coalition, and my primary function, as many of you may have already discovered, when you call the helpline, you get me. If I wasn't helpful, I apologize. I promise I will do better next time. If I was, you're welcome. One of the benefits of my job is I don't really have to know anything. What I do is I'm kind of a portal to the Coalition. So folks call me up and they ask questions of various types. And generally, I don't have the answer, but what I do know is where I can find it from the many, many, many good folks that make up the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition in New York. I am overwhelmed by the fact that there is so much collective knowledge and experience in this room and in this organization that it really, really, really kind of makes me feel a little weird about taking the money, but saying, I'll have somebody get right back to you. One of the particular talents that I do have is I don't mind listening. And so I do that quite a bit. And once again, they pay me. So the helpline is really, in addition to being a portal to the Coalition, it's an opportunity for folks at various stages of their life and times to actually get a human being on the phone who is going to be responsive and listening. And that's the biggest part of it, you know, the fact that for most of us, when we are in distress, especially when it's not 9 to 5, very often we're expected to leave a message. And the thing that makes the helpline special is 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a human voice. And if you're really lucky, it'll be me. I have a few minutes here. I'm going to do the introduction of Bryan Post. And that is a very exciting opportunity for me to do because I have known Bryan Post. I say that like I know him. I feel like I know him because like Angela Tucker, I've seen all of her movies. And with Bryan, I've seen all of his movies too, a lot of his movies and his books and the influence of his institute and all that other kind of good stuff. Many years ago, when I was first blessed to run into Bryan Post, I was struck by how much he talked about love. And he really said it with like a hard L, you know, it's like just that love. And the answer seemed to be that somehow love was at the core of it. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that's nice, but, you know, and the more I got to listen to him, the more I became a student of what he was advocating, I realized that ultimately he's right. And one of the things that is a benefit of being older and sticking around in a racket long enough is you see the universal principles always come back. We may dress them up a little bit. We may put a few letters more. We may define and focus, but the universal truths remain universal truths. So listening to Bryan Post today, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to put it plainly is, I think, is listening to the truth. One of the things I want to think about today was the presentation of Angela Tucker, obviously, and the other presenters in there. We have a safe space, not a safe space. What do we call it? Do we call it thank you so much, Amy. That's the Coalition for you. That's the Coalition. You bobble, you stutter long enough, and somebody will give you the answer. The self-care table, and the person who's personing the self-care table is incredible. And I haven't known her for a very long time, but what I know for sure is that she is one of those folks that has a way of helping you care for yourself. And as a mother, that's something that I know you get it. That's my wife, by the way, Karen. As a mother, one of the things that's often failing, if you can call it that, or an oversight, or is self-care. The idea of sacrifice till there's nothing left of you. We had a fight about a rom-com the other day that I was just having trouble with the premise. She was telling me the premise was that you do everything you can for your kids. And I was telling her, yeah, that's true, but not if it means burning yourself to a crisp. And we end up settling somewhere in the middle. But self-care should be an important message because you cannot care for anyone else if there is nothing left of you. You know, and so much of our teaching is about doing that we forget that part. And when we decide to deny ourselves for our children, we teach them about denying themselves for someone else. And that's dangerous. So self-care is out there, do it. And I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm just going to bring up Bryan Post. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with his work and know who he is. And I thank Bryan for coming on up and sharing with us the wisdom. I asked him earlier on, I said, is there anything you want me to mention? He said, just let your spirit guide you. My spirit has guided me to bring it up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me see if our clicker works. So here are a few resources because we only have an hour and a half together, more or less. And I hope the information inspires you to want to learn more. For 25 years that I've been teaching this information, I've always said it's a different paradigm. And a paradigm is the way in which you view the world. And so it's a different lens. Everything changes. And so it's a different paradigm that I'm going to be sharing with you, which is challenging because it's not the paradigm that we live in. And in order to change paradigms, it's been said that paradigms take 20 years to change, that long. But the other way we change paradigms is through repetition. And so hearing information once is not enough. You have to be committed to listening to it and reading it and studying it over and over and over and over again. Otherwise, your old paradigm kicks in automatically and you're just back to doing and saying and thinking and believing what you've always believed, which is the byproduct of generations of beliefs. Your beliefs have been formed over generations. And so when we are talking about a different paradigm, we are challenging generational beliefs. And what's also significant about that is that is how the brain's wired. So a lot of times we want to talk about parenting tools and techniques when it comes to children, and we want to change behaviors. But what we don't realize is that your behavior is the outcome of the way your brain is wired. Now, can you change your brain just from reading a book or attending a lecture? Absolutely not. How many of us have been on diets for 3 days or 3 hours? That's because in order to really do something, you have to do it over and over and over and over and over again until your brain changes. Your brain changes. Is when your brain changes, something in your body is changing as well. Something in your heart is changing, something in your gut is changing, and once it changes, usually it's hard to change it back. So what I am sharing with you is not only a byproduct of the last 25 years of my professional life, it's all I do, but it's also a byproduct of my life, and my life is a byproduct of all the generations that came before me. Now, it's fantastic that I had an opportunity to interview last week Angela Tucker, who I think is amazing. And as I typically do, when I talk to people or when I read things or when I watch things, I have an OCD brain, so I can get hung up on very small things. And with her book, I opened the book, and the first thing I saw was a poem by Khalil Gibran, and it's called On Children. Now, the significance is that 21 years ago, I wrote my first book, and it was called For All Things a Season. It's not even in print anymore. You can still find a few old copies on Amazon. But in that book, I opened with this quote by Khalil Gibran. On children. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he also loves the bow that is stable. Khalil Gibran, the prophet, as cited in Angela Tucker in her book, You Should Be Grateful. I love that quote. It says so much. It says that you cannot control the future of your children. That's a hard one. Now, you hear me speak words. You will hear me speak words, but beyond those words, I want you to feel what it is that I am saying. I want you to feel it. You cannot control your children's future. Deepak Chopra says, you can't prevent the future, but you can influence the future from the present. You can't prevent the future, but you can influence the future from the present. What does that mean? That means that what you sow into the present has a great likelihood of showing up in the future. Your power as parents comes not in the future, but in the moment, in the today, in the thought, in the feelings, in the beliefs. All of those are actual vibrations that you are creating in the present that go into the making of the future. When you speak about your children, when you talk about your children, when you think about your children, when you touch your children, when you spend time with your children, you are sowing seeds for the future. What seeds are you sowing? In the midst of stress, in the midst of overwhelm, in the midst of fear, in the midst of terror, in the midst of trauma, what seeds are you sowing? And then we wonder why we reap the harvest that we reap. Now, it's been amazing this morning to listen to Angela and to listen to Ms. Hoskins, talk about their experience in foster care. And Ms. Hoskins said she loved her foster parents. It's a beautiful thing. I know thousands of children who cannot say that. Thousands. It is such a beautiful thing to hear one who says it. And then Angela says she loves her foster parents. In her documentary, Oh, just in the very short opening of the documentary, they talk about the power and the impact that her foster parent had in her life. Amazing. I know her, she loves her adoptive parents, her adoptive family, the ones who raised her. I too am a byproduct of foster care and was adopted. And I get to tell you that I love my adoptive parents. My mother's over there now, along with my wife, my kids. My kid right here. As many of you are foster parents and adoptive parents, I want to let you know that my mother and father made my life possible. They made my life possible. Now, if you follow my story at all, you know I share freely about my experience as an adopted, traumatized child growing up with parents who had trauma. And so this conference being one about resilience, bouncing back, what we have to think about is before we become resilient, what about the experiences that shaped us? The malleability of who we are. The shaping of who you are and who you've become that allows you to bounce back when you go through hard things. That allow you to bounce back when you go through stress and struggle and through pain and suffering. And then there's my grandson. That's Ezra. And it just gets better. Trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. Slide's a little messed up there. Any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. Now, here's the thing. When you spend time in the foster care area, in the adoption area, you get used to thinking about trauma in all of these very specific ways, like child abuse and sexual abuse and neglect and all the traumas that we get associated with children. But see, here's the problem with that, is the first thing we start talking about is the trauma associated that children have experienced. What about your own trauma as children? We've all been through trauma. Our brains have all been shaped and influenced by trauma. If you lived through COVID, you lived through trauma on a macro scale. When you're in this room today, you hear someone cough or sneeze, everyone's ears go up. If you had the most idyllic childhood, all you have to do is go back one generation and you're in trauma. 2 generations, you're in unspeakable trauma. Stress research says trauma can be passed down up to 9 generations through the DNA. We carry it with us. We carry it with us. And the thing is you don't even remember it. It's unconscious. It's unconscious. But trauma being any stressful event. I was just telling someone the other day about this is dating me, but how many of you remember the lady who got scalded by the McDonald's cup of coffee? Right? I had a cup of McDonald's coffee yesterday morning in the airport. I'm like, damn, they still haven't learned. That coffee was hot. That happened when I was a kid. And I think about that because I've said many times that poor lady, we don't know it now, but that poor lady, if she didn't have an opportunity to express, process, and understand that experience, she doesn't drink hot liquids anymore. Some of you have kids that don't want to take a bath. Or they scream that the water's too hot and you stick your hand in it and it's cold. Or they don't want to eat foods Because trauma shapes our sensory experience at every level. Because trauma, which is any stressful event, which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable, if you don't have an opportunity to talk about it, if you don't have an opportunity to cry about it, if you don't have an opportunity to talk about it some more and finally make some sense of it, it is capable of changing your brain for the rest of your life. So that stressful event, which is prolonged like bullying, many of you were bullied when you were little kids in school, or you lost a parent, or you had other bad things happen. If you didn't have an opportunity to express, process, and understand, which many of us don't, and I'm going to go into that, many of us don't, then you carry that with you. You carry that experience with you in an unconscious way. It gets stored in your brain. It gets stored in your brainstem. And then what happens when it gets stored in your brainstem, it gets activated when we become stressed. But when we become stressed, we don't realize it because we're associating ourselves in the moment. So in the moment, we're thinking about the thing that stresses us out, but we don't realize that the reason we're feeling the way we're feeling is because it's tapping into a very old part of our brain. And that's why oftentimes we don't get an opportunity to work through those traumas. Now, there's two important terms, regulation and dysregulation. Regulation is the experience of stress within your window of tolerance. Dysregulation is the experience of stress outside of your window of tolerance. That's when you're stressed out. When you are stressed out. Now, there's a researcher, his name's Alan Shore. He wrote a book called Affect Regulation and the Origin of the Self. Actually, he wrote 3. These are tomes in the 90s. And in the very first volume, in the introduction, he cites Taylor et al. 1997 that affect dysregulation, being stressed out, is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. That was 1997, that being stressed out was a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. You know what that tells me? That if you're stressed out, if you've got kids that are stressed out, if you've got kids that are acting out, if you've got kids that are in school and they're not learning, if you're feeling overwhelmed in your homes, if you're feeling overwhelmed in your relationships with your kids, the first place you've got to start, and this is what it told me 25 years ago, the first place you've got to start is not on the diagnosis, it's not on the medication, it's not on the therapy, it's on the stress. It's on the stress. Reduce the stress. If affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders, which is psychological, behavioral, emotional, physical, because in 1999, the Atlanta Center for the Study of Disease estimated that 80% of disease was related to stress. 80%. Bruce Lipton's a cellular biologist, writes a book. He wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. He says 98% of disease and disorder is related to stress in the autonomic nervous system. No one's just coming out and saying 100%. Everyone's scared. He pushes right up to 98. Listen, if you got problems, it's because of stress. And here's the problem with stress. It's very simple. Stress causes your thinking to become confused and distorted and makes you forget. That's the problem with stress. Stress causes your thinking. This is Joseph Ledoux, New York University neuroscience scientist, wrote a book called The Emotional Brain. Stress, when we are stressed, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. So when you're stressed, you're not thinking clearly and you can't remember. So the problem with stress is that you can't think clearly and you can't remember. So what you forget is that you have the power to control your stress. you start looking outside of you for the answer that actually lies inside of you. And then the media tells you you don't have the power. Church tells you you don't have the power. School tells you you don't have the power. The therapist tells you you don't have the power. The psychiatrist tells you you don't have the power. And pretty soon, you don't have any power. And the reality is, all you've got to do is remember to breathe. That is the first step. That is the first step. If I say, how do you reduce stress? In the 1970s, Herbert Benson was a physiologist at Harvard. He wrote a book called The Relaxation Response. And in that book, he says it has been documented that the most effective way to interrupt stress is through breathing. But the first thing we do when we become stressed, we stop breathing. We stop breathing. We stop breathing. So I'm going to scoot forward a couple of things here because I got a slide that's going to go with what we're about to do. There it is. Then we'll back up again. Bruce Lee says, one of the best lessons you can learn is to master how to remain calm. One of the best lessons you can learn is to master how to remain calm. Well, how do you remain calm? Breathing. Breathing. When things are stressful, you have to master the ability to breathe. Because if you stop breathing, you become stressed and your thinking's confused and distorted and your short-term memory is suppressed. So we're going to breathe. I've been carrying this bowl around for 20 years. 20 years teaching how to breathe because it is in all the struggles that you're going through, all the challenges that you have and that you face. This is the most powerful key that exists. Right here at your nose. Breathe with me. Practice your breathing as often as you can think about it every single day until you master breathing in the presence of stress. Because when you do that, everything changes. Everything changes because your brain changes. Your physiology changes. So in your struggles, you go home. We're talking about, the title of this talk is the parenting toolbox. Here's what no one's telling you. You are the tool. You're the tool. You're the most powerful tool in the toolbox. And your tool is your physiology. It is your brain. It is your body. It's your emotions. It's your ability to stay regulated in the presence of stress because Lord knows your kids stress you out. Your tool is the most powerful thing that you've got, and that's your ability to breathe and keep yourself calm. Now, let's look at this a little bit. This is my sister and I. What I like about this picture is that if you look at the two of us, you see me on one side, you look at me, I look love drunk. Look at that face. I just look drunk. You look at my sister, look at her eyes. She's terrified. She's stressed out. So when we talk about resilience, we have to understand the foundation of what we come from. We have to understand, I understand the foundation that I came from was with a biological parent who loved being pregnant. She loved being pregnant, even though she knew she was going to place me for adoption. She loved being pregnant. And I said, when did you decide that? When did you know for sure that you weren't going to keep me? She said, I was certain at 7 months. She said, I just had to start ignoring you. But Thomas Verney, well, actually, Mitch Gaynor wrote a book called The Sounds of Healing. He says that the fetus is capable of hearing as early as the 4th week after conception. The 4th week, Thomas Verney wrote a book called The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, says as early as the 2nd trimester, the fetus is capable of psychological processing. Conception in 9 months is a lifetime. It is a lifetime. And what happens in utero, we carry with us throughout the rest of our life, and 9 times out of 10, no one's talking about it. We have behaviors that are directly associated with in utero experiences. Our strengths, our capacity is directly associated with your in utero experience. Now, I ask you all, what was going on with your mom and dad when you were in utero? Now, take a deep breath. Breathe into that for a moment. Because, see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you off of thinking about your kids. Because if it is true, which I believe it to be the case, I know it to be the case, that you are actually the tool, why am I going to spend an hour and a half talking about your kids? Because if I do that, I'm disempowering you. Because I understand that the real power lies within you. So think back to what was going on with your biological mother when you were in utero, when you were in the tummy. And then John Bowlby, the father of attachment, says, and he said this in the 1950s, as from the age of 0 to 3, all of our social and emotional blueprints for the rest of our life are formed. From 0 to 3. Well, from neuroscience, we know that it's from conception to about the age of 5, because the brain is 95 to 97% developed by the time you're 5 years old. So from conception of 5 years old, all of your social and emotional blueprints are already formed. But see, I love little scientific findings like that, because the children that you have in your home, most of them don't have learning problems. They have social and emotional problems. Because trauma is emotional. Relationships are emotional. These are not thinking problems that we're trying to figure out. These are emotional problems. These are feeling problems. When you're stressed, it's emotion. Now, my sister, she was premature. She was potentially exposed to alcohol. She was weighed 3 weeks, 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds. She spent the first 3 months in an incubator in the 1970s. Her life completely different from the earliest stages. Her ability to rebound from stress completely different from my ability to rebound from stress, simply based on the in utero experiences. It's significant. Some of your deepest challenges don't come from right now, today, or what you went through yesterday. It comes from your in utero experience. It comes from those first 5 years of life. You have to reflect on those things. You have to think about those things. You can't change them. You can't change them, but what you might need to do is grieve them. Grief is the most pervasive form of trauma that exists in our society. The most pervasive. Grief impacts us more than anything else. This is my belief. I believe that unexpressed grief, unprocessed grief, impacts us more than anything else that exists. And the reason I believe that is because when we don't have the ability to cry and talk about something, and cry and talk about something, and be mad about something, we don't get an opportunity to emotionally make sense of it. And so it just gets stored. Now, if we back up a couple of generations, how likely was it that great-grandma and great-grandpa could grieve through a loss? Or grandma and grandpa could grieve through a loss? And then it shows up with your own parents. We become afraid of emotional expression. We become afraid of tears. We become afraid of anger. We become afraid, and when we become afraid, we have to shut people down. And then it just runs all the way down to our children. We can't allow our children to have any range of emotional expression. So then we just carry unexpressed, unresolved grief with us from one generation to the next generation. And when we become stressed, that's what gets triggered. That's what gets triggered. What gets triggered is your loss and your pain and your traumas rooted in those experiences that you were not able to grieve. And it gets stored in your brain stems, the base of your brain. When you become stressed, your amygdala gets activated. When your amygdala gets activated, it releases cortisol. The cortisol is your body, your brain and your body's primary stress hormone. So when you get stressed about anything, that stress activates your brainstem. And the higher the stress, the deeper into the brainstem you experience. That becomes all pre-verbal. It becomes pre-verbal, it becomes unconscious. So when you have a traumatic experience and you don't get an opportunity to express and process and understand, it gets stored in the brainstem. And then when you become an adult and you get stressed, when you get really stressed, that experience is what gets stirred up in your body system. It's that experience and other experiences that are driving that overwhelm, that drive that frustration. And then what happens, because it's our children's behaviors that causes that stress. Our children's behaviors are what causes that stress. And that stress is what stirs up all those old feelings that we don't like. And so then we do three things. We try to control the behavior, we try to suppress it, or we try to change it. And it's all focused on the behavior all the time. And then we become wired for just focusing on behavior. Just focusing on behavior. And when you're focused on behavior, guess what you're not thinking about? Yourself. You're not thinking about your own emotional reactions. You're not asking yourself, where does that come from? When you're feeling stressed out and you're pulling your hair out because you just got another phone call from the school, you're not thinking about where those reactions come from. You're only focused on that child's behavior. So you're losing power all the time. Your power is going away from you all the time. When the real power is within you. The real power is in your ability to identify why you feel so stressed. To breathe. To get your thinking back online. To activate your hippocampus, which helps you with your short-term memory. And then your hypothalamus. In your hypothalamus, you release a hormone called oxytocin. So your amygdala releases cortisol, primary stress hormone. Your hypothalamus releases oxytocin, which is your brain's anti-stress hormone. So the further I go into this stuff, the more simple it actually becomes. But simple is not easy. We have to be able to release oxytocin in the presence of stress. Oxytocin is your brain's anti-stress hormone. But guess what? Oxytocin is a learned hormone. Your brain releases cortisol, your amygdala releases cortisol automatically. But you have to learn how to release oxytocin. So if when you were a baby, you didn't have an adult that was attentive, that was attuned, that was affectionate, and took care of you and calmed you and soothed you when you were upset and in distress, then your oxytocin response might be deficient. So then when you become stressed now, it's harder to calm yourself down. It's harder to calm yourself down because oxytocin is not turning on. Now, most of the children that come into your homes have an oxytocin deficiency. And when you have an oxytocin deficiency because you didn't learn it, because it wasn't modeled, so that structure, that part of your brain isn't turning that anti-stress hormone on effectively enough and rapidly enough, then when you become stressed out, you stay stressed out longer. But what happens if you have adults and parents that when you get stressed out, we get stressed out too? Who's turning on oxytocin? Nobody. And then what happens is we start repatterning the brain for stress and no soothing. And it all starts with our inability and our fear around emotions. Around emotions. When we become stressed, I really like this triangle. We move into something called the victim cycle. When we become stressed, your brain is looking for a threat. When your brain is looking for a threat, then you're a victim. When you become a victim, you're looking for a perpetrator, for a persecutor. You're looking for when you're stressed, you're looking for the threat. When you're looking for the threat, the next thing you do is look for help to remove it. So you're looking for a rescuer. So your power leaves you. When you become stressed, when your child is acting out and you become stressed, you become a victim to your child. And you go to the counselor to rescue you, or you call Chester on the helpline. But what we don't realize is that our children were victims too. They were victims too, and we were victims, and we get conditioned. And before you know it, we're all helpless and we're all overwhelmed, and we go year after year after year. And that's why I say children grow older, but they don't grow better. Because we're recreating a cycle. It's a part of a paradigm. You have to be willing to recognize your own stress, step outside of that triangle, and ask yourself, it's very simple, it's just really hard to do. You have to ask yourself, what's stressing me out? Why is it stressing me out? And where did it come from? Even though he's sitting there acting like a loony person. You have to be able to step outside of that. Because if you don't, you're going to stay stuck in that victim cycle. And if you're in a victim cycle, you can't rescue your child. If you're in a victim cycle, you can't make your child feel better because you're actually going to create threat for them. Then they're going to see you as the victim. And it's just a real nasty cycle that we get stuck in, that our society is stuck in. Our society is always looking for a perpetrator. If it's not Biden, it's Trump. There's a perpetrator. We feel helpless. We feel like we need someone to rescue us. The rescuing starts with you. And it starts with your ability to breathe and think clearly in the midst of stress and activate your short-term memory. Alan Shore says, in times of stress, we regress to our developmental zones of comfort. When you are acting out, this is very simple. I like this for all of us. When we are acting out, it's because we're stressed out, and that causes us to be regressed. When you're acting out, you're stressed out, and you're acting from an earlier emotional age. When Prince said, act your age and not your shoe size, that's a biological reality. When you become stressed, you regress to an emotional age. With your children, when they become stressed, and you know they're stressed when they're acting out. They're not 15, they're not 10. They might be 5, they might be 2. They might be an infant. It's the emotional age you have to be able to see. But if you are stuck in being a victim, you can't see the emotional age because you're looking for a threat. You have to be able to see the emotional age. And you have to be able to respond to the emotional age. And for years, I've always wanted to create a pair of glasses that I could give to people that you look through the little sunglasses, maybe they're blue, and inside the blue is a picture of a baby, so that when you look through them, you see the baby and the other person. What if we stopped looking at ourselves as perpetrators against one another and we just started looking at ourselves all as babies? We're just babies. It changes your brain. You're not as threatened anymore. The baby cries, you don't get overwhelmed, because that's all behavior is. It's just a cry for help. It's just a cry for help, but some of us can't tolerate crying. We can't tolerate crying because that's what we learned. We learned that crying was not okay. Crying is okay. Crying is okay. 3 pathways of emotional expression. Now, you got to think about this when you're a child. When you were children, how many of you was it okay to have attitudes with your parents? Roll your eyes, talk back, talk smack. Some of you just squirmed a little bit just thinking about it. Because you knew. What was it? What's that saying? Roll your eyes at me one more time and I will knock them into the back of your head. Attitudes is a pathway of emotional expression. We have 3 of them: attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. These are pathways through which we express energy, because emotion is energy in motion. Emotion is energy, is an energy, and it moves, and it's got to be able to move. But if you're a child and you're trying to transition because your parent tells you to do something you don't want to do, and then you have an attitude, and then you get smacked or you get yelled at or you get told don't do it again, then the attitude pathway gets suppressed. When the attitude pathway gets suppressed, you go to feelings. Now, how many of you could yell at your parents, cuss them out? No. So then your feeling pathway gets suppressed. Now, notice how it's going down. If you can't express through your attitudes, you go down to your feelings. If you can't express through your feelings, you end up at behaviors, because it's energy in motion, and the energy has to move. It has to move. How many of you could have behaviors as a kid and get away with it? No. So it gets suppressed. Attitudes get suppressed. Feelings get suppressed. Behaviors get suppressed. Now you think about that with our kids today. You think about that with our kids today. Our kids today, we don't allow them to have attitudes. We don't allow them to have feelings. We don't allow them to have behaviors. Our foster children, child comes out of their biological home. For whatever reason, it makes me no difference. Makes me no difference what the reason is. The child comes out of that biological home and they go into a stranger's home, and they don't get to have attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. An infant comes out of their biological mother's womb and they go into an adoptive placement. Doesn't matter how great the placement is, the child does not get to have attitudes, feelings, and behaviors, because that's how we're conditioned. We're conditioned that attitudes are not okay, feelings are not okay, behaviors are not okay. So then what happens? You get pushed down to anger and depression, because anger and depression have to come out through behaviors. Anger and depression have to come out through behaviors. There's no other place for them to go. But we then focus on the behavior. We focus on suppressing the behavior. And I say, if you live 6 months or longer in anger, depression, and behaviors, you're living in trauma. You're living in trauma. So what happens after 6 months? You start to move to diagnosis, medication, residential treatment, disrupted placements, restraint. You see how it happens? You suppress the attitudes, you go to the feelings, you suppress the feelings, you go down to the behaviors, you try to suppress the behaviors, you create more anger and depression, which have to come out to behaviors. That goes on long enough, you are going to a hospital, you are getting diagnosed, you are going to get a medication. And what's the hospital and the medication all focused on? Suppressing the freaking behavior. You become stressed out. Your amygdala sees a threat. you want to control, you want to suppress, you want to change. All of a sudden, we have an entire institution called mental health that is all focused on controlling, suppressing, and changing behaviors. We are creating the very thing that we are trying to stop. It is called insanity, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We do the same thing over and over, and no one's doing anything different. Because we're all focused on the behaviors. Why are we all focused on the behaviors? Because we are all stressed out. And the behaviors become the threat. So what do we have to do? We have to teach our children something different. We have to teach them something different. So here's how it's going to work. Because you are friends of Pat O'Brien, who I love dearly, Pat is a grassroots social worker. He's a dying breed. Social workers nowadays want to be behind a computer. Okay, so take a picture of Pat O'Brien and maybe print it off, because he's a real one. He's a real one. Since you came to this conference, I am giving you permission from this point forward, and it's only because you attended this conference, that I am giving you permission to ignore attitudes. I'll take the blame. Giving you permission to ignore attitudes because everything you've been taught about attitudes is wrong. It's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. An attitude is an energetic experience. A child rolling their eyes never bloodied a single nose, never broke a single bone, and never blew out a window or ran away. It's just an attitudinal expression. It's just an eye roll. It ain't gonna hurt you. You're not gonna die. Your child's not going to end up homeless because they roll their freaking eyes or because they go, meh, 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 meh. Let it go. Like a cool breeze off the mountaintop. Just let it just wash over you. And breathe. And breathe. Because I've been teaching this stuff a long time and I still struggle with it. My daughter gives me a little attitude. Those eyes squint. Those eyes roll all the way over her head. And she turns around and she goes, walk into her room. Close that door. Ooh, my dad is on my shoulder. Ooh, oh, ew. The struggle is real. And I teach this stuff. So when I say it's simple, it's not easy. I'm being honest with you. It is not easy. But here's what happens. When I allow my daughter to have that attitudinal expression and she goes to her room, I don't follow her to her room like my parents used to follow my sister. How many of you had siblings or remember having your door removed from your room? That's the definition of insanity. You got a kid that you already don't like. They're talking shit to you. They go to their room and they slam the door and you go take the damn door off. And you know the room is nasty because you complain about it at least 3 times a week. So now you done took the door off. The room ain't really going to get cleaned up. And now you walking past it every single day. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. It's insanity. It's insanity that has been passed down for generations. And we just do it because we don't want to struggle. We don't want to struggle internally with all those messages and all those stories that we grew up hearing and learned from our mom and dad, our grandma, our grandpa, our great-grandma, our great-grandpa, and all those generations. We don't want to have that struggle because when you move into that struggle, all of a sudden you're not so certain. Oh, when you move into uncertainty, you get more scared. You have all these questions. You feel insecure. You're not sure what to do. But that's when you're closest to a breakthrough. That's when you're in discomfort. In discomfort is where growth occurs. It's where we grow. You don't grow without pain. If you want to do something different in your home and your family with these children, you've got to be willing to go through pain. You have got to be willing to suffer because they have suffered and because you have suffered. And suffering has to become just a part of what you do. It's just a part of it. So I'm giving you all permission to ignore those attitudes, as hard as it's going to be, and breathe. That's the first step. Now think about this. If attitudes being suppressed lead to feelings, being suppressed lead to behaviors, if you start ignoring attitudes, guess what's going to happen? Probably 50% of your struggles are going to just go away. Because when she goes to her room, she plays her little music and gets in her little vanity and puts on her little makeup and curls her hair and talks shit to her siblings. They're all older. Our youngest is 16. All her siblings are older now. She gets on FaceTime. You can hear her talking shit. Oh, mom this and dad this, and just jibber jabbering. And don't you know I want to just kick down the door. Boom! Who you talking to? Talking shit about me. I pay the bills in this house. Right? It's just wired in there, isn't it? It's just hardwired. It's so hard to not, ooh. That's just the reality. But when I go through that suffering and I struggle with myself and I allow her that time, in about 10 minutes, she comes out, and you know what? She's good. Wants to make me a snack. You need something to drink? Can we go get ice cream? She's good. Now the question is, can I get good? Because if I get good, guess what we just avoided? We avoided feelings. We avoided behaviors. Again, guess what the brain learns? The brain learns that she can get stressed and I can get stressed and nothing bad's going to happen. Bruce Perry says the brain always returns to the way the event was handled the last time. The last time. The brain always returns to the way the event was handled the last time. So every single time I ignore the attitudes and she goes to her room and we calm down and we get through it, her brain has a little seed planted. And I call that a love seed. And those little love seeds, they grow. They grow and they grow and they grow and they cancel out fear. After the attitudes, I give you permission to encourage the feelings. Encourage the feelings. Your child gets upset and I don't like it. I don't like you and I don't like this house and I don't like anything you cook. Just take a deep breath and say, I understand. I don't like this house either. My cooking's not so great. And they get confused. Not sure what to do. Or you just say, tell me more. Or you just say, you're mad. Honey, you're mad. Give it to me. Well, let it out. Well, let it out. If you're mad, let it out. Now, remember, your child's been conditioned that feelings are not okay. So they've been pushed down to that through years of conditioning. They can't have their attitudes. Now they're in their feelings. Their feelings are not really okay. They're elevated and they're yelling and they're screaming. They're used to being suppressed. They're not used to having you say, give it to me. Now, I'm going to give you something even harder. Let me give you breakthrough material. This is how you create a transformation in your relationship with your child. You take a deep breath and you say to your foster child, or you say to your adopted child, if I had been through what you've been through, I'd be mad too. I'd be sad too. Give it to me. Let it out. That's healing work. But that's love work. See, that's what love does. Love is accepting. Love is understanding. Love is passionate. Love is strong. Love is the most powerful healing force in the universe. And when fear shows up against love, it cannot sustain. Love and fear cannot coexist. Where one is, the other one is not. When your child shows up, you got to see the fear. You got to see the fear. You got to see that they're stressed, that they're scared. They're not going to attack you. They don't want to hurt you. They don't blame you. They may say they blame you, but it's coming from their pain. So you got to see the stress and you got to see the fear. And then you got to say, give it to me. Because I feel how you feel. Because if I'd been through what you've been through, I'd feel the same way. I'd cry for days. I'm mad too. I'm mad at all the stuff that happened to you since you've been in this world has happened. So be mad. Let me be mad with you. We can both be mad. Your kid ain't gonna know what the hell has happened to mama. They will not know what to do. They won't give it to you. They won't give it to you because they don't feel safe to give it to you. But they're conditioned for stress and fear. So there's going to come another time when you're going to get the feeling invitation again, and you got to show up the same way. So you're going to recondition them just like you're reconditioning yourself. Recondition yourself to be bold in the midst of fear. Recondition yourself to breathe when you're stressed so that when they show up with that stress and that fear, you hold strong and you say, give it to me, honey. Close your eyes. Say, give it to me. One day, they're going to give it to you. They're going to tell you how much they hurt. They're going to tell you how sad they are. They're going to tell you about some suffering that they went through when they were by themselves and no one cared and they felt all alone. And they're going to tell you. And they're going to keep telling you, and they're going to tell you. And they're not used to having anyone hold it for them. But if you hold it for them, if you just tell me, give it to me, I can take it. I know I have been weak before. I know I've shut you down before. I know I've got mad before, but it's changed and I want it. That's healing. That's where healing is at. Healing ain't in talk therapy. Healing ain't in medication. Healing ain't in diagnosis. Healing is in the ability for love to stand in the presence of fear. That's where healing is at. And it starts with your ability to just slow down and breathe. And remember, you are powerful. You have gone through some stuff to get here. You have everything within you to do everything that needs to happen. And that don't mean your kid is all of a sudden, some of your kids will magically, seemingly magically change. That will happen. That will happen today. I've seen it happen. This is all I do. I work with hard families and hard kids. So for some of you, it'll happen. But for others of you, your kids, the reason it's not going to happen is because your kids have too much conditioned pain. They've been through too much. It's not about you. It's not about you. How many times have you heard that? It's not about you. Don't take it personally. Well, you can't help but take it personally because of stress. Because the longer you spend with someone, the more enmeshed you get at a cellular physiologic level. So you can't help but take it personally. But what you can do is when you take it personally, you can breathe, get your thinking online, get your short-term memory turned back on, and then you can remember this is not about me. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's about their pain. It's about their grief. So you got to get real with your own pain and your own grief, because your pain and your grief will interrupt your ability to hold presence for your child when they're experiencing their pain and their grief. I'll say that again because that's a hard one to take in. Your resistance to your own pain, your fear around your own pain and your own grief is going to be a barrier to your ability to hold space, for your child when they are experiencing pain and when they're experiencing grief. Because their grief is going to trigger your grief. Their loss is going to trigger your loss. Their pain is going to trigger your pain. And you're going to take it personally. You've got to be able to know that you are okay. No one is going to die. Probably some of my favorite words. Nobody's going to die. Your brain makes you think you're going to die, but no one's going to die. And then you just have to go through a process with the behaviors. If your child's already conditioned for behaviors, you're just going to have to go through a process. It's like when a kid runs away. When a kid runs away, our old pattern is to want to punish them when they come back. Do the exact opposite. Really, what you should work on doing is doing the exact opposite of what you were taught. Now think about how hard that's going to be. When your child runs away and they come back, celebrate, put on a party. Be thankful, hug them, love them, say, I'm so good. I'm so glad that you're back. Because when they come back, they're expecting a fight, which just recreates the negative pattern. So think about doing the opposite of what you've been doing. Albert Einstein says everything is energy. Everything is energy. And that's all there is to it. So if we simplify all of this, in every given exchange, we're just having an energy exchange. I'm either sending you a good vibe or I'm sending you a bad vibe. If I'm sending you a bad vibe, it's changing the frequency. If I'm sending you a good vibe, it's encouraging the frequency. That's really what it all comes down to. It's just a vibe. It's just a frequency. We're all on a frequency, and when we're out of frequency, it's like a two radio stations playing different stations at the same. Some of you may not even remember what radio is. Ain't that some shit? Wow. I say that, I'm like, yeah, somebody might not even ever listen to a radio in here. It's like two radio stations on different channels playing at the same time. And the more stress you get, the higher the volume gets. The more stress you get, the higher the volume gets. You've got a knob and your child has a knob. And if y'all are stressed out, you're on different frequencies. So you got to match their frequency, and then you pull them up through your good frequency. You pull them up. It's so interesting, this whole vibration and frequency thing. It's taken me literally 25 years to get to this understanding and this awareness, because that's where your power is at. Your real power is in understanding that you're in charge of your own vibration, that you have the ability to walk in a frequency, and that frequency can elevate other people around you. You ever heard that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? Your frequencies match. Your frequencies match. Einstein says this is not philosophy, this is physics. So I say when you're stressed, you're emitting a death vibe. Everybody remembers Darth Vader. And when you're calm, you're emitting a life vibe. You got to ask yourself in any given moment, who are you? Are you Yoda or are you Darth Vader? I didn't say ask your kid, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to be Darth Vader. That's their right. Their right is to be Darth Vader. But we're the adults. We have the more mature brains. Most of your children's brains are not even fully mature yet. The orbital frontal cortex, your prefrontal cortex in your brain, your executive control center for all of your social and emotional relationships, doesn't even come fully online and mature until you're 22 to 25 years old. So you're dealing with children whose brains are not mature. There's a proverb that says, raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. Well, another translation of that is raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they are mature, they will not depart from it. Because most of us know that just because a child is 20 years old doesn't make them mature. Love is the force. Love is the force. The stress model says all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. Those are your only two primary emotions, the only ones you need to concern yourself with. It's either love or it's fear. It's love or it's fear. If you see fear, you have to be able to respond with love. Because if you don't, you're going to match the fear frequency, and the fear frequency is just going to grow. And that's okay. That's okay because we're working against negative conditioning. So I fully expect, I don't even expect it, I encourage all of you to go out and yell and scream at your kids the next time they mess up. And once you finish yelling and screaming, then I want you to take a deep breath and I want you to ask yourself, was that Darth Vader or was that Yoda? Was that love or was that fear? I was going to give you an assignment after that one, but that might be plenty right there. But if you are brave, then you go to your child and you apologize. You say, I'm sorry. How many of you grew up with parents who apologized to you when they messed up? It's almost non-existent. So here's what's going to happen. When you go to apologize, your tongue's going to get all twisted up. Because you're not used to it. Push yourself through it. Push yourself through it and say, I'm sorry. I'm going to do better next time. And don't say anything else. Leave it alone. Leave it alone. Just drop the seed and move away. The magic is in your ability to hold yourself accountable to do something different the next time. Because what you'll do is you'll stop creating that threat every time your child feels stressed. Because all your children have experiences with adults who are not safe. All your children have experiences with adults who abandoned them. All of your children have experiences with adults who rejected them. All of your children have experiences with adults who said that you're bad, you're no good, and I don't want you. And when they get stressed, that's where they go. They don't go to you. They don't go to you. You who has done your best to love them and shelter them and nurture them and do all the good stuff, they don't go to you. They go to all the bad stuff because that's the nature of stress. It is through the expression, the processing, and the understanding of the fear that we can calm the stress and diminish the behavior. The stress model changed my life 22 years ago. I stopped seeing everything as behavior, and I started seeing everything as stress and fear. I just stopped looking at behavior. Behavior is just a signal. It's like smoke. It's a warning. It's a red flag. But the root of behavior is in stress and fear. I learned that if I can calm the stress and allow the fear and outlet, the behavior goes away. The behavior that you are struggling with today is just a reflection and manifestation of your child's stress and fear. Exploring the parenting continuum. On one side, we have responsibility. On the other side, we have reactivity. I could go into this in depth, every single one of these. I just want you to just take a look. You have mindfulness, time in, because a lot of times parents are like, well, what do I do? Sometimes you do nothing. So start with that. Start with just not doing anything. Next time your child has an issue, which is going to be this afternoon, face it. Face it, as soon as you get home, as soon as you pick the kid up from school, there's going to be an issue. Just focus on doing nothing but breathing. And don't say a word. Don't say a word, and then send Pat O'Brien an email and let him know what happened. Or call Chester on the helpline. Just start there. Just start on breathing in the presence of stress. Because that's the beginning of mindfulness. Mindfulness is slowing down and paying attention to how you think and how you feel. Well, before we can teach someone else to slow down and pay attention, we got to be able to do it ourselves. Get mindful. Get mindful. That's how you start teaching. We teach our children not through what we do to them, but how we model to them. What is your physiology doing in the moment? That's where the brain rewiring happens. It happens in how you're showing up. It doesn't happen in what you're doing to them. That's what all your parents did to you. That's what my parents did to me. That don't teach anything. That just teaches you how to be sneakier. I wrote a whole book called The Great Behavior Breakdown, going into 26 severe behaviors. I did all of them. I did all of the behaviors. What we're doing to our children is just creating more stress. If what you're doing is creating more stress and more fear, you're just perpetuating the problem. And the problem with that is that we're losing another day. We're losing another hour when we could be in relationship, we could be in connection. May the force be with you. I'm Bryan Post. Thank you very much.